Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, for years, we've been hearing what we're hearing today. Look, we just want the same rights everybody else had, but we also heard for years, we just want to live and let live. And I've got news for all of my friends across the aisle that don't know. There is a right to the marriage you're claiming you need this bill for that the Supreme Court's already said you got. It's there. So what this bill, the so-called Equality Act, is really about, it's not about giving rights. This is about taking away rights. You got the rights. But this is saying that part of the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, that's got to go. And just like my friend read from page 25, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993, that's got to go. You can no longer, after this bill, you can no longer use that as a defense. When we sue your church, we sue you, a preacher, male or female, it doesn't matter, we're coming after you. If we sue a rabbi, you can't hide behind the First Amendment or this Religious Freedom Restoration Act. It won't help you because we're saying you don't have those rights the Constitution gave you. That's all RFRA was to begin with. It was just codifying what was in the Constitution. And I've thought so much about my late dear friend, Bishop Harry Jackson. He and I have stood outside this Capitol together for years trying to protect Christian rights. And I miss Harry, and I think about him a lot. And let me say, not as articulately, but for heaven's sakes, you've got these rights. Allow people that believe what Moses said when he said, a man shall leave his father and mother, a woman leave her home, the two will become one flesh. Let them be able to practice the teaching of Moses. When Jesus was asked about marriage, he quoted Moses verbatim. Please allow Christians that believe what Jesus said to practice that. Allow preachers that took oaths and practice it. Allow them to do that. Don't take away the rights the Constitution gave. And don't take away decades of rights that women have worked for and
Gentleman's time has expired.
And just give it away to men. I yield back.
Gentleman yields.
Indiana, Ms. Spartz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in opposition to H.R. 5, so-called Equality Act. Unfortunately, this is another bill which didn't go through the committee process or real debate. The Judiciary Committee should have had an opportunity to consider H.R. 5 in a legislative hearing. Sadly, this is the first time we're debating just hours before it's set to receive a vote, with no ability to propose any amendments. I'm not sure why we even bother to have committees if we're passing significant legislation without them. I would just like to highlight three major concerns. Concern number one, broad scope. And I agree with a gentleman from New York, there are some protections already exist, and last year the issue of possible employment discrimination of gay and transgender individuals was addressed by the Supreme Court in an opinion writing by Justice Gorsuch. But this bill has very sweeping changes with potential major adverse implications for religious freedoms and women's rights and safety. Concern number two, broad and ambiguous definition of gender identity. This language have unintended consequences and be taken advantage of by criminals or sexual predators. Also, the safety of women in prisons, juvenile detention facilities, and domestic violence shelters could be put at risk, which would force them to share traditionally women-only spaces with biological men, even if a biological male fraudulently gained access. Issue number 3, opportunities and safety for female athletes. The science is clear. Men are biologically stronger than women. According to a 2019 Duke University study that involved dozens of specialists in sports and science and medicine, quote, biological males and biological females are materially different with respect to main physical attributes that contribute to elite athletic performance, unquote. The Women's Sport Policy Working Group, a group of champion female athletes and academics, has stated that even when height, size, weight are equal, males are incrementally stronger and generate more explosive force, so that if males and females are forced to compete against each other, the physical safety of females is definitely at risk. The reality has already shown itself to be harmful to the opportunities and safety of female athletes. For example, a female track athlete in Connecticut lost potential scholarship after being pushed out of qualifying for regional track meet spots by 2 transgender athletes. A transgender MMA fighter caused significant damage to a female athlete's skull. This example demonstrates the far-reaching consequences the bill can have on women and girls should it become law. American women have worked very hard to secure our rights for many years, and just last year, we celebrated 100 years of women's suffrage. But this is a giant step back. Perhaps if this body had actually deliberated over this bill and engaged in the proper legislative process, this concern could have been addressed. But a vote for the Equity Act in the current form is a vote against religious freedom, against women, against female athletes, against incarcerated women, and against science and safety. A vote yes on this bill is a vote against our daughters. I yield back.
Reserve.
Speaker, I rise today in objection to the so-called Equality Act. Once again, under the guise of equality, the left is prioritizing its radical agenda over religious freedom, the well-being of children, and the safety of women and girls. As the father of 3 daughters and the grandfather of 9 granddaughters, I am outraged at the assault that this bill launches on women in sports. And furthermore, as a healthcare practitioner, I am infuriated at its blatant attack on the conscience rights and religious freedoms of those in the healthcare industry. This bill is not about preventing discrimination in medical treatment. It's about forcing medical professionals to abandon their conscience rights and medical judgment to comply with the left's extreme views on gender. The Equality Act would prohibit physicians from counseling children with gender dysphoria. Instead, they would be required to administer dangerous medical treatments, including puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries. This mandate contradicts science. Increasingly, we are finding that these treatments compound these children's confusion rather than solving it. The catastrophic effects leave children physically and psychologically scarred and often render them sterile. It's nothing short of child abuse. The left will not tolerate disagreement with its view on gender. They provide no conscience protections and explicitly state that the Religious Freedom Restoration Act does not apply to this new definition of sex. Physicians refusing to perform these harmful treatments would be punished, and even if they object because of religious or moral convictions. The Equality Act is another attempt by the left to promote its radical agenda and suppress everyone else who disagrees. We must fight for the conscience rights and religious freedoms of our medical professionals, and we must stop our children from being used as pawns in the game of political correctness. Thank you, and I yield back.
Well said. Well said. Thanks. I'd like to yield time to the gentlelady from Colorado, a volunteer counselor to incarcerated women, Ms. Lauren Boebert.
Thank you very much for yielding time. The Equality Act. Equality for who, Madam Speaker? Where is the equality in this legislation for the young girls across America who will have to look behind their backs as they change in their school locker rooms just to make sure there isn't a confused man trying to catch a peek? Where is the equality for women who have been sexually assaulted? Under this legislation, their crisis counselor may be Alexis, who was actually born Alex. and they'll have to talk to him about their assault. Where is the equality for parents who want and deserve the right to raise their children free from government overreach? Under this proposal, Congress seeks to replace mom and dad with bureaucrats. This isn't hyperbole. In Ohio, a mom and dad had their child removed from their custody because they didn't allow their daughter to undergo gender transition. Removed from their custody. And so here we are. The left will lay down the rights and security of millions of Americans, particularly young women, at the altar of gender ideology. Following the lead of liberal indoctrination camps, also called colleges and universities, my colleagues on the left are committed to advancing this radical ideology. The rights and sovereignty of individual states be darned. So much for federalism. The power-hungry left will not slow down until every school, every church, every workplace, every state, and every community adheres to the left's definition of gender. You disagree? They'll fine you. They'll imprison you. Or, as we've seen, they'll even take your children. And let's make sure the American people know this is only the beginning. The Equality Act requires doctors to perform abortions, and they're going to use your tax dollars to pay for them. Once the left codifies their ideology, they'll come for your speech. It's already happened in Canada, where you can be fined and imprisoned for misgendering someone. And they won't stop there. Nothing will ever satisfy the left until there is complete and total compliance. Madam Speaker, Scripture says, when speaking of those who have turned their back on God, who have traded the truth for a lie, professing to be wise, they became fools. I can think of no better description of the so-called Equality Act or Inequality Act than this. The utter foolishness, it's astounding. Up is down, wrong is right, left is right, and boys are girls, and vice versa. Madam Speaker, for the sake of our sons and daughters, for the sake of parental rights, privacy, decency, and so much more, I urge my colleagues to vote no on this horrendous legislation, and I yield back.
Thank you, lady. That was so well said. Absolutely. Up is down and right is wrong.